Concluding the topic of the philosophy of nothingness. Why I chose the Bible. Point 1. Why we cannot see the Creator directly. In previous reflections, I discussed why we cannot see the Creator directly. And this question requires not superficial but deep reflection. Because this is where many people stop. They say, if I don't see Him, then He doesn't exist. But this statement logically fails to hold up. If God is the foundation of existence, if through Him space, time, and the very possibility of existence exist, then He does not have to be an object within the world. He is not an element of the cosmos. He is not the largest star. He is not the highest form of energy within the universe. He is the reason the universe exists at all. When we look at mountains, at oceans, at galaxies, we see effects. But we do not see the first cause itself. Just as we see the light of a lamp, but do not see the principle of electricity itself. Attempts to see God as a physical object is an attempt to place the Creator within the category of creation. But if He is the Creator, then He is by definition above the category of observable objects. This doesn't mean He is incomprehensible. It means that the method of knowledge must be different. We cannot see reason directly, but we see its manifestations. We cannot see love as a physical object, but we see its actions. So it is with God, it's not a matter of direct visual contact, but of recognizing traces of His action. Therefore, the logical next question is, if God exists and if He doesn't have to be an observable object, has He left clear evidence of Himself? Point 2. Searching for evidence of God. If God is real, He cannot be completely hidden. Because if He created rational man, then reason is part of His design. And if reason is part of His design, then knowledge of the Creator must also be possible. I searched for answers not only in religious circles. I turned to philosophy, to history, to the arguments of skeptics and atheists. I read different points of view. And I saw that the human mind is capable of arriving at the idea of a supreme cause. But it can rarely describe the nature of this cause. People can be sincere, but they are limited. Even the most brilliant thinkers contradict each other. No one can prove their absolute infallibility. Therefore, I concluded, if God truly reveals Himself to man, this revelation must be enshrined in a source that has survived generations, trials, criticism, and time. And then my search narrowed to ancient texts. Point 3. The principle of scales. Choosing based on the preponderance of truth. When I contemplated choosing among the many spiritual books, I wasn't looking for an absolute mathematical guarantee. I understood that not a single ancient book has reached us in a state of 100% textual identity with the original. Rewritings, translations, human error, all these have left their mark. Therefore, I applied a simple but honest principle, the principle of scales. Imagine two different books placed on a scale. One on one side, the other on the other. I don't demand that one book be perfect and absolutely flawless, while the other is completely false. I look at which one carries more weight, the weight of internal consistency, historical depth, spiritual power, prophetic accuracy, moral loftiness, and impact on humanity. And even if the odds aren't tenfold, but only slightly, a mere 51% versus 49%, I'll choose the one that outweighs. Because in the search for truth, it's not the absence of questions that matters, but the direction of the balance. When I compare the Bible with other religious texts, I see that on my internal scale, it outweighs the other. Sometimes not because everything is completely clear, but because a combination of factors creates a greater weight of trust. The weight of antiquity. The weight of prophetic lineage. The weight of moral teaching. The weight of internal integrity from beginning to end. The weight of a personal spiritual response. I'm not claiming I don't have questions. I do. But the questions don't outweigh the overall testimony of the text. If we weigh doubts against historical stability, the preservation of manuscripts, the depth of theology, and the spiritual experience of generations, the Bible weighs heavier. That's why I make my choice. Not because I was forced. Not because I was born into a certain tradition. But because, in my mind, it carries more weight. And I believe that an honest person should do just that, choose what outweighs the others, even if the balance is still small. After all, truth is rarely revealed in its entirety all at once. But if the direction is clear and the balance is palpable, it's reasonable to choose the side with the greater weight. And so, among many books, I stick to the one that outweighs the others. Point 4. Antiquity and preservation of the text. When we talk about the antiquity of a text, it's important to understand that in the ancient world, books weren't distributed the way they are today. There were no printing presses, no digital copies, no instantaneous dissemination of information. Each copy was copied by hand. This took months and years. Copyists treated the text as sacred. There were strict rules. Letters were counted, lines were counted, every detail was checked. An error could mean the destruction of the entire scroll. This speaks to the enormous responsibility. If the text weren't of supreme value, people wouldn't dedicate their lives to it. Furthermore, the Bible survived persecution. There were periods when it was banned, when preserving the text could cost freedom or life. But it was precisely during these periods that it was preserved with particular care. It's a historical fact. Many books have disappeared. Great philosophical works have been lost. Ancient works have come down to us in fragments. But the biblical text has survived in a vast number of manuscripts. This doesn't automatically prove its divinity, but it does speak to its exceptional significance. Point 5. The realistic nature of the biblical style. The Bible is remarkably honest. It contains lengthy genealogies. To a modern reader, they may seem boring. But they are precisely what give the text its historical depth. Genealogies connect events to specific generations. Furthermore, the text doesn't hide the failures. Abraham doubts. Moses hesitates. David sins. Peter denies. The people of Israel repeatedly fall away. If this were a national legend, it would be made heroic and idealized. But here we see realism. This realism brings the text to life. It doesn't create an artificial image of perfection. It shows man as he really is, capable of greatness and of failure at the same time. And this resonates with our experience of life. Point 6. The Hebrew language and the depth of structure. The Hebrew language is built on a root system. Most words are formed from 3-letter roots. This creates an internal network of relationships. Words are not connected randomly, but rather along a semantic line. This allows the text to be multi-layered. We considered the figurative meanings of letters as a way to understand the language more deeply. Even if modern linguistics explains letters as phonetic signs, their ancient origin points to a figurative basis. Aleph, manifestation, bringing into being, disconnection. Bet, inclusion, acceptance. Gimel, the transition, connection by step. Dalet, access, threshold, planting. Hate, manifestation, openness, possession. Vav, cohesion, connection, joining. Zayin, elevation, ascent. Chet, living arrangement, arrangement. Tet, convergence, concentration, approach. Yod, seminal penetration. Kaf, crushing compression, crushing. Lamed, learned strengthening. Nem, fluid departure. Nun, duration, constancy. Samek, return through support. Ayin, lowering for the sake of vision, humiliation. Pe, the edge of an exit. Sadi, tense raising. Kuf, a flow, a layering of form without a source. Resh, an extended beginning, long. Shind, transformation, division. Tav, a final touch. These meanings help us see the depth of words, especially when we consider them as part of specific terms. For example, Avi, father, where Aleph, manifestation, and Bet, inclusion. Therefore, the Father is the manifested beginning that includes future generations. It is the source of life, the foundation of the family. In the biblical context, the word father often signifies not only biological kinship but also source, founder, spiritual mentor. This expands the understanding of the term. Bar, son, pure, where Bet, inclusion, and Resh, beginning. Therefore, the Son is a new beginning within an existing line. It is continuation and renewal. Interestingly, the word can also mean pure in certain contexts, imparting an additional meaning. A new beginning is purification or renewal. Davar, word, event, where Dalet, access, Bet, inclusion, and Resh, beginning. Therefore, the word, in the biblical sense, is not just a sound. It is an event. It is an action. It is what opens access to a new stage. When God speaks, creation occurs. When a word is spoken, a process is initiated. This makes language not just a means of communication, but a tool for changing reality. Point 7. Translations and the value of the original. History shows that attempts were made to physically destroy the Bible. It was burned, banned, and those who possessed it were punished. But when it became clear that it could not be completely destroyed, the struggle shifted to another level. If the source cannot be erased, one can attempt to change its perception. Bible translations were deliberately distorted, adapted to a theological system, political ideology, or cultural agenda. This can easily be verified by comparing the Russian Synodal and the English King James Version. Sometimes key terms were translated in such a way as to weaken their force. Sometimes key words were removed. This does not mean that the entire text was distorted. But it does mean that the struggle took place not only at the level of manuscript destruction, but also at the level of meaning. If the enemy cannot destroy a book, they can try to change how it is understood. The history of religious controversy shows that text has often become an arena for struggle. Various forces have sought to either strengthen their influence through the text or weaken its impact on society. But it is precisely the presence of numerous ancient manuscripts and different traditions of textual transmission that allows researchers to compare, analyze, and return to earlier forms of the text. This makes the original particularly valuable. The original language is the foundation. It allows us to see where the translation conveys the meaning accurately and where it adds a nuanced interpretation. This is why consulting the ancient Hebrew and ancient Greek texts becomes more than just an academic curiosity, but a necessity for serious research. This is why I created the aforementioned Hebrew alphabet chart, so that anyone, even one who does not know Hebrew, can find the precise meaning of ancient words. Paradoxically, attempts to distort or weaken the text only emphasize its power. An empty book cannot be distorted. A meaningless text requires no struggle. If a book has been the subject of intense struggle over the centuries, this in itself speaks volumes about its influence. Therefore, the value of the original increases. It remains an anchor to which we can return to restore the original meaning and preserve the purity of perception. Point 8. The personality of the God of the Bible. Philosophy can lead to the idea of a first cause. But the Bible goes further. It speaks of a person. God thinks. God wills. God enters into covenant. God speaks. God reacts. This is not impersonal energy. If God is a person, then relationships are possible. Love is possible. Responsibility is possible. And this changes the entire understanding of spirituality. Point 9. God seeks man. In many religions, man strives for God through effort. He ascends the steps of spiritual practices, performs rituals, accumulates merit, undergoes purification, and strives to become worthy of meeting the Supreme Being. The picture often appears like this. Man is below, God is above, and between them lies a vast distance that must be overcome through one's own efforts. But biblical revelation paints a fundamentally different picture. In the Bible, God Himself comes out to meet man. This idea runs through the entire narrative. Already at the very beginning of history, after the fall of man, we hear not man's cry to God, but God's question to man. Where are you? This is not a question of ignorance, but a question of searching. This is the Creator's initiative. God makes a covenant with Noah. God calls Abraham. God speaks to Moses. God sends prophets. In all these cases, the initiative belongs not to man, but to God. This radically changes the very structure of spirituality. Man does not rise to God to interest him. God Himself bends down to man to restore broken relationships. If you think about it, this is profoundly logical. If man is damaged by sin, if his mind is darkened, if his will is weakened, then he is incapable of achieving absolute holiness through his own efforts. Then either salvation is impossible, or the initiative must come from above. The Bible asserts the latter. This is evident in the theme of the law. The law was given not because man invented it, but because God revealed it. This is evident in the theme of prophecy. God speaks before man realizes the need to hear. This is also evident in the very structure of the covenant. A covenant is not a contract between equal parties. It is the initiative of a stronger party proposing a relationship. This understanding destroys pride. It leaves no room for spiritual superiority. If God seeks a person, then that person is found by grace, not by merit. This also changes the understanding of prayer. Prayer is not an attempt to attract the attention of a distant God. This is a response to an existing invitation. God is not indifferent. He does not observe from the sidelines, coldly and detachedly. In biblical history, He is involved. He reacts. He grieves. He rejoices. He enters into dialogue. And this is another important point. The God of the Bible not only seeks people individually, but also acts in the history of nations. He shapes destinies, directs events, warns through prophets, and gives time for repentance. Divine initiative is also manifested in patience. In the text, we see that judgment does not come instantly. God gives time. This speaks of a desire for restoration, not destruction. Compared to impersonal philosophical concepts, there is no room for searching. The absolute does not seek. The law does not call. Energy does not enter into relationships. But a personal God can seek. And if God seeks a person, then that person has hope. Not because they are strong enough, but because God is merciful enough. This revolutionizes the spiritual perspective. It is not man who climbs to heaven, but heaven who bends down to man. And this is one of the most profound and distinctive features of biblical revelation. Point 10. Justice and mercy. If God is only just, man perishes. If he is only merciful, evil remains unanswered. Biblical revelation unites both sides. This complex tension runs through the entire history of the text. Point 11. The historicity of revelation. The Bible is rooted in history. Cities, kings, wars, real events. It is not a timeless myth. It is a text embedded in human history. Point 12. Personal conclusion. I do not claim to understand God completely. But based on the sum of arguments, reflections, and comparisons, the Bible remains for me the most integral revelation. My choice is not blind tradition. It is a path of reflection, research, and the search for truth. And if a person seeks honestly, the light will surely be seen. Amen.